This is my genogram of my dysfunctional family. I've never talked about this openly and publicly, so this might be a little bit of a betrayal to my family. So here I am, and in genograms, what they do is you have your dad's family over here, and you have your mom's family over here, and you trace it back. And I never knew my grandparents. Growing up, I was never close to any extended family, so there was no aunts, uncles, cousins, nothing that I didn't have that type of upbringing. My father, his parents came from Mexico, and on my mother's side, what is a significant event to her was that her mother had passed away when she was 20. So her mother died when she was young. And my father is from the silent generation, the 30s, and my mother is a baby boomer. I think she was in the 40s. They're 11 years apart, so there's a pretty large age gap between the two. And when my mother met my father was in the process of getting a divorce, and they had met and were seeing each other while he was still married. And they didn't get married until his first marriage ended, and they got married rather quickly. The story that I was told from my mom, it varies, but the last time she told me it, she said that they knew each other for 6 months before they had got married, which is rather quick, right? Back then, it was a different generation, it's a different time. There was very strict traditional roles within the Hispanic community. Both of them are Catholic. I'm sure that played a role into it, and their individual beliefs and preferences also played into their upbringing and their how they showed up in their relationship together and in their co-parenting. So when they got together, they had my sister, my other sister, and my brother. They were 3 years apart. I came along much later. So there's an 8-year gap between me and my brother. And then there's a 13-year gap between me and my older sister. And this is my intuition and speculation. So my father and my mother had a difficult marriage. I've never talked about this openly. So my mother, and this is my speculation. I mean, some of it is true, but when I get to the why I think I was born much later is my speculation. So my mother had an affair. My father and mother were struggling with intimacy. My mother has openly admitted that she was lonely and that another man entered the picture and provided some attention. So that enraged my father. And my understanding was that my siblings, my two sisters and my brother, were already born. They were little. Because when my father had threw my mother out of the household, when my father was at work, she said that she would go and visit the children meaning more than one. So my father wanted to divorce my mother, and all of this occurred before I was even born. So we're talking about intergenerational trauma, or ancestral trauma as they call it. So he wanted to divorce my mother. Long story short, that did not happen. He changed his mind and they stayed together. Speculation goes, more than likely they stayed together because it would have been his second divorce. He was limited on his future options. He already had started a family with the second woman. So again, it's like that would have been a major difficulty for my father, let alone, my mother. Like, how there would have been a lot of difficulties on her part as well. So my belief is that they should have got the help and therapy and support that they needed at that time. They didn't. A lot of things were swept under the rug. I'm sure it was hard for my siblings. They have their memories, their experiences. We've never, the four of us, the three of us, we've never been in one room and talk openly about what it was like being raised by our parents, what experiences that we experienced, what was traumatic for us and what wasn't, But my speculation was that there was a lot of pain. My father had a hard time letting go and forgiving my mother. And so there was abuse in the family. And that's why I think that there's a gap, because they were less intimate with one another, of course, after the affair, after one parent threatening divorce and everything. So I've heard stories. This came directly from my father, that he wanted at one time to kill my mother. And my youngest sister was a witness to that. And I do know a little bit more details than that, but I'll just leave it at that. And so out of the two sisters, how interesting how one is, on paper, I suppose, maybe a little bit more successful, healthier, stable than the other. This sister, you could just see within her employment, within her relationships, maybe in her attachment style, there was some I'm sure, some difficulties and struggles. And I'm sure she's very proud of where she's at right now, given what she's experienced and what she's been through. So that occurred. But I think this explains why there's a 13 year gap, because they were less intimate with one another. My father probably, the way he dealt with his stress was to be more at work. So he became a workaholic. And he's had a long history with alcoholism. He's battled with alcoholism. Of course, he's not going to call it that. Even my mother is a little bit in denial of that, saying, well, he might be just a heavy drinker. It's like, no, he's an alcoholic, Never got help for that. So unfortunately, when we look at family systems theory, a lot of it rides on the shoulders of the parents, right? The parents are in charge. The parents are the ones that are supposed to provide a healthy example and healthy modeling and be supportive and empathetic. And nowadays, we've come a long way where parents are guided to give emotional coaching to their children, to be more present with their children. And I would say last 40 to 50 years, there was a transformation. Whereas before, 50 years ago, it was, they weren't even seen as like people, children. They were just like there to be obedient, and you discipline them however you want. And there was less concern about their well-being. And now we know a lot more now. So I think, I was a surprise. My mother had me when she was much, much older, in her late 30s, getting close to her 40s. And so I came along and was kind of a surprise. And, and when I was, because this happened, I even know the exact day. So this happened 2 days before my 11th birthday, where I came home and I witnessed a violent situation. My father was abusing my mother, and he did it in front of me. And when I think about that moment, yes, it's painful what I witnessed. It's more painful what I experienced, because after he abused my mother, he came to me and he said a few things to me. And that was more disturbing in my mind than what I had just seen. It stays with me to this day. So I don't know if my siblings know about this. I never talked openly. I never told my brother about it when he was alive. I never, I don't know. But this was a very impactful event for me. It was traumatic. And down here, if you can see down here, if a person's life is met with trauma, their life gets chaotic and unhealthy very quickly. I mean, it just takes not very much to knock someone off into the realm of chaos. And so I kind of just illustrate that here. And that's not, the abuse was one thing, but I claim to have experienced childhood neglect, chronic invalidation, alienation. There was a lot of self-destructive and unhealthy patterns in my family. There was a lot of blame. There was a lot of shame, guilt. We didn't deal with our family issues in a constructive and healthy way. My sisters, everyone has a different genogram, so they have a different outlook. They have a different experience. And what they would say was, yeah, we knew something was going on, which is why we left the family at a very early age. We had left the family. I think they were young. I think my older sister may have been 17, 18, right out of high school. She left. So I didn't really grow up with her. I didn't really get to know her. And in fact, when she would come over to the house, it often would feel like she was an aunt. Like, oh, my aunt is here to visit us. And even as a child, I could remember, and I'm sure my sister remembers, every time she would come and visit us, I would say, oh, it's the successful sister, because her temperament, she was very calm and nice, very pleasant to be around. Seemed like she had a good, solid foundation. She went on to have a successful marriage. She's the only sibling to be married. She's the only sibling to have had a consistent career, and she's excelling. She's even furthered her education. Out of all the siblings, she is the most formally educated within us. She's worked hard, and she's had a lot of help. She chose a good partner, and she's had other mentors, other people outside of the family that can provide support, encouragement, and so on. At this time, I think it's important to mention that my two siblings, being female perhaps, they were close with one another. Me and my brother were somewhat close to, I was more closer to my brother than I was to my siblings. Perhaps that has to do with our gender. Perhaps that has to do with, well, maybe he's a little bit more closer to my age. Perhaps that has to do with, well, these people, my sisters, they moved out earlier on, and my brother was like me, stayed with the family. So we lived together. We shared rooms together. My brother, let me speak a little bit on my brother. He dropped out of high school. My parents, from what I hear, didn't encourage him to stay. He, and you wonder, right? Like, this is how he dealt with his stress, with his financial management was to get into drugs. He was a drug dealer, and he was a very successful and popular drug dealer in where we lived in East Austin. He was a, I don't know what you would call it, but he was a kind of like a kingpin. I estimate that he had regulars coming in and out of the house, at least 20 regulars. It became known as like the druggy house, like, oh, they do drugs there, So I grew up. If anyone knows about the adverse childhood experiences, that's one of them. If you grew up in an alcoholic family, if you grew up in a abusive family, if you grew up with drugs in the household, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So my brother dropped out of high school, and he was working at a gas station for a while, making minimum wage. And when he got busted, he got a felony record, and that impacted, I'm sure would have gone on to impact his future. Because after he got out of jail, I'm not quite sure, but in less than a year, he died. And it was a tragic, I don't have time to get into it right now, but it was a very tragic death. Unexpected. He was very young. And I wasn't there. I was actually out of the city when this happened. And so I had to be approached by my parents, and a counselor had told me, and I was in shock, and that was a big ordeal for me. His relationship status, we pretty much mirror each other. So if I'm the black sheep, he would have been a black sheep as well, because one thing that he had going for him was that his relationship was on the rocks, but at least he established some relationship. He had a child. I don't have any children, so that puts me lower in social status in the family, within the whole entire family, and then even within society. If you don't have a child, you're still seen as suspicious, and there's a little bit of warming up to single, whether that's intentional or not. Like, it's hard these days trying to establish a healthy family unit. So if you see this highlighted, for the longest time, I would say since 2010, this is the family unit. I live with my parents live with me, we support each other, we help each other out, and that's how it is. You'll see little lines here, and what that indicates is that, like, at one time had a good relationship with my parents, as good as could be, right? But then I kind of had a fallout with my mother, and I leaned a little bit more on my father, not all that much, because my father is illiterate, struggles with alcoholism. He's what would be diagnosed in modern times as intellectually disabled. He's never seen a professional, never gotten any help for any of his struggles. It's just he gets a pass, like, oh, he's old, oh, he comes from an old generation, and so both of my parents, if I had to sum it up, there was one word that I could pick, I would say warmth. Warmth comes to my mind because I never felt the warmth from my parents. They were very cold and distant, invalidating. Not once did I come home from school and have any of my parents ask, so how was your day at school today? How are your grades looking? You having any difficulties? Can I help you with something? They never really was involved. that was their parenting style. It was very dismissive and passive and uninvolved and absent. And we know how difficult that can be for a child. My mother never fully healed from the past. She, at one time, when I saw a mental health professional in my youth, the mental health professional suggested that she either get therapy herself or go to Al-Anon, and she didn't pursue that. When she stayed at and I don't even know, this goes back to my story. When she took me and we were at a women's battered shelter, she was only there for like 2 days. I mean, she went back to him. She was like, how am I going to survive? She gave him another chance. And as the story goes, maybe after that day, maybe that put a little fear into him that like, oh, she's serious, that she'll take off. And, we were kind of, at least for me, there were things told to me about, like, I was kind of put in the middle, like, okay, if they were going to separate, I knew that I was going to be put in the middle. Like, there were things being said that like, no, he's going to come with me. No, he's going to come with me. There are days where I think what life would have been if had they did get a divorce. Like, maybe it would have been for the better. Because when something traumatic happens like that, infidelity, abuse, marriage number one is over. They have to restart from scratch and rebuild marriage number two. And I don't think that they were able to successfully do that. I think they stayed together for us, for the kids, but we know that that isn't always the best course of action. So in my youth, there is question of whether I struggled with autism. It wasn't really questioned until I was an adult. And if that's the case, then that would have definitely impacted how I experienced my childhood and how I just organized my world. When all of this chaos was happening in my childhood, I know now I was struggling with physical symptoms, but now I look back and I recognize the mental symptoms, that there was anxiety. And even in my youth, in my teenage years, depression came along, and I've been struggling with depression ever since I was a teenager. To be quite honest, I was like maybe 14, 15, 16 when I was at a low point. And I don't think I need to say any more about that, but when people are at a low point, they don't want to be around anymore. So I was there at a very, in my teenage years, and that came up later on in life for me. I was 20 when my brother passed away, and so I was still a young man at that time, and that impacted me a lot. I was never very close to my sisters. I don't have any fond memories. I don't remember. I remember a little, but I don't remember much. When my brother passed, no one really tried to connect with me. No one really tried to offer words of comfort. I had one of my brother's friends hug me. he didn't really say all that much, just hugged me. And I really appreciated that. Never did I get a hug from my father, from my mother, from my two sisters. They, at the funeral, even afterwards, they've never approached me and said, how are you doing? How are you coping? Never once did they hug me. Never once did they, even now to this very day, which, let me fast forward a little bit. So if you see these lines right here, there's these red lines, and then there's a it seems like there's like a cutoff right there, and that's because we are emotionally cut off. We are estranged. Let me talk a little bit about estrangement. So another word for estrangement is when you disown, like you emotionally cut off, you stonewall a particular person. Ever since I was little, I never had much of a relationship with them. And we grew apart. And there was an event that happened between me and my older sister that created much conflict, much shame on my part. And that happened, I'm guessing, I think it happened in 2010. Ever since then, I've never had any desire to reach out. They've never had any desire to reach out. When I talked to my mother about this, she's like, well, you don't want to reach out. And I'm like, well, what about them? After 20 years of no contact, of no communication, of nothing, we're just expected to, I'm just expected to show up for Christmas and, hey, everybody, sorry for everything. Let's just get along. The reason why I bring up the estrangement is because that's traumatic. It's traumatic for me. It's stressful for the entire family. And it's going to generate future issues. I'm not going to go into it too much, but there is a discussion about the will. My parents need to make a will. And so that's going to create some friction between the siblings, between even at this time, I know that my parents do not agree, and that they're going to, I don't know if they want to do a joint or if they're going to do separate. If they do separate, they're going to have different things on their wills. And all of this kind of in one little neat bow connects back to how dysfunctional we are. We at this time, we can't have simple conversations. There's chronic arguing. I'm the identified patient. The identified patient is, so the scapegoat is usually the identified patient. It's a biblical term, meaning that, like, in biblical times where they would put all the sins into a goat and cast it out. And I hear things, I hear things from my siblings. I hear things from, you're basically seen as the problem. And so if you're the problem, if we get rid of you, if you were to change, then the problems would go away. And one of my wishes is that my entire family would be able to see that that is a mistake. We are a system, and we have an unhealthy patterns and dynamics. So, for example, instead of me and my mom blaming one another and getting into high intensity conflicts, we need to see that the problem is not me, the problem is not you, the problem is here. It's the space in between us. And 69% of conflicts are perpetual, meaning that they're chronic, they don't ever get resolved. And so if you look at healthy relationships, what they do is, well, they learn how to effectively and healthy manage the problem. We don't do that. We don't have the tools, we don't have the skills to manage uh, healthy problems. We lack boundaries. We lack problem solving skills. We lack understanding. We lack compassion and empathy. And when you look at it, when you look at, every individual, to my sisters, to my father, every individual has their own profile, their own individual psychology. So like my attachment style, I mean, I'm a little bit, it's not stagnant. It's not static, I would say. It's like, okay, maybe I'm 10% avoidant. I tend to be more ambivalent and insecure. Uh, I can't think of it right now, but like, I know that like I'm not entirely secure. That plays into my relationships. It plays into my future relationships. I'm working on it. Like that's the most disheartening thing for me, is that like they don't see, my family members don't see the progress, and if they've said a lot of hurtful things to me. My father is like, this is why you don't have any friends, or my mother is like, no one is ever going to live with you, or no one thinks like you do, and things like that. And it's very hurtful, and they never apologize. We're not a family that apologizes. We're not a family that owns up, takes accountability, and says, hey, I could see what I said hurt you, and that wasn't my intention. I'm very sorry about it. I don't even get that. I don't even get like an attempt. My father never apologized to my mother for what he did. He never apologized to me. And all of this, I mean, if you think about this, all of this, like if you just kind of pluck me out of the family system, I got my own life. I got my own, like, life is very difficult and stressful right now. And I'm scared. It's hard. I I I struggle daily, and just to make it on my own, I do what I can. I do what I can to even help my parents. There's a lot of things that they don't see. My dad might vouch for me and say, yeah, he cuts the grass, he buys his groceries, he takes us to the doctor, he changes light bulbs, he vacuums the carpet. He's a very tidy person. It's just that we know that he struggles. He's qualified for disability. We know that that's not easy for him. We know he struggles with romantic relationships. We know that he desires and he wants a girlfriend. He wants a woman to build a life with. And we know that the average man these days, no mental illness at all, is hugely struggling with that. So there are individual struggles. Like with me, perhaps my sisters, they moved out of the city. Again, they have their own journeys. They were able to, have a plan, and they have their own homes. Okay. I think out of the entire family, I was the one personally that struggled with gentrification. Every time I go into my city, I live in Austin. Every time I go there, it's unrecognizable. The people are vastly different than how it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I struggle with the grief and loss of my home. I was attached to my home. I lived in that home for 30 years. And I only have one picture of it. I don't have any pictures of the inside of the house, the backyard. In fact, when I go there and I visit in person and I walk the neighborhood, it just feels the same, but it feels a little different. So gentrification, I was talking to someone about this recently. Gentrification is traumatizing. It hurts. And, I live now in a, me and my parents have lived in this home for, I don't know, 15 plus years, let's say. And if there's going to be some dispute, and I'm not going to acquire this home, that's going to be a huge loss. Be devastated. I'm very attached to this home. Everything, when you go into my home, everything that you see is built by me. Everything, the sofa, the chairs, the arrangements, the paint on the wall. how everything is everything that you see, everything that's hung on the wall, everything. It's all me. That's my home, and that's what my father has told me. He said, "This is your home." Now, I am very open and welcome to getting professional help, and this is the exposure, perhaps, is that I have been screaming the alarm bells for a long time, and I've done what I can to protect myself. I've tried to establish healthy boundaries. I've tried to survive however I can. Now, for a while, and this was the last argument I've had with my mother, was I told my mother, can we get professional mental health support together? I've even shown that when I was first hospitalized, that they've recommended that I get family therapy, that I get family support. I believe one of the most important, healthy, and valuable things a person can have and do to their mental health is to have a strong support system. I don't have that. I don't have any friends. I don't have any alliances with my family members. So that takes a toll. It's kind of a chicken and the egg problem, because you wonder, like, well, is all this dysfunction contributed to your mental health, or is your mental health a contributor to all the dysfunction? Like, I would love to have a healthy relationship with my parents. When it comes to estrangement, ideally, if I could wave a magic wand, I would say, look, once or twice a year, maybe, I think it'd be wise if you can come visit us, you can take them out, go on vacation or something. But like, this, the way I see it, this is my family. I don't consider my sisters family. I know that breaks my mother's heart, because she's like, what are you talking about? They are family. They're It's like, you're not understanding my experience. Like, they the the loss, like, if I was to see, when one time, okay, I've never shared this. I've never shared this before. I'm going to share it right now. I've never spoken to anyone about this. So one time I was out of the city, right? And long story short, I came to the city on a bus. I was on a bus, and we went to ACC to pick up someone there. It was kind of a work situation kind of thing. This bus would pick different people from work. I was at the time I was doing an internship, and when I was in the bus, my sister was working close to ACC. She was there, and I saw her. I was in the bus, and I saw my sister, and she was there with some children. And I didn't get out of the bus and have it strike, hey, haven't seen you in a while, or I felt a deep sense of sadness. Like, who is this person? I recognize this person, but this person isn't in my life. And what I would want my siblings to know is that, like, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want this. I wish I was successful. I wish I wasn't a burden. I wish. It's a little emotional to me. The pain is a little difficult to describe at this time, but at this time, I think it's best to not have any relationship with my sister. Just let it be. Just, they have their own lives. They have their they have children. They have their own houses. They live in different cities, and I'm saying, if I could have it my way, I put up a brick wall and say, look, this is my life, this is how I'm living it. We have an arrangement. I'm living with my parents. I don't like the meddling. I don't like the gossiping. I don't like you doing things. Like, I'm trying to establish a boundary, and if you're going to go around and do things, oh, what he doesn't know won't hurt him. It's like, no, wrong. It's wrong. There's an incentive if they, oh, the golden child. Oh, if there's a future dispute, it can be argued. Well, they didn't jump ship. They were there. They provided. They're taking us out to eat. They're and I know I'm not alone. I know that the reason why I'm being open about all of this is because I know that there are people out there. You see, family estrangement, conflict, even all the way to abuse, it's all behind closed doors. It's all hidden. And I've just barely scratched the surface. I've not talked about. It's difficult for me, but I was wanting to write a compilation of all of my traumas to say, look, in my childhood, I experienced this trauma, this trauma, this trauma. Then when I transitioned to adolescenthood, I experienced this trauma and this trauma. When I transitioned to my young adulthood, this is what I experienced, as well as trauma. Here's why I think I had a failure to launch. Here's why I think it was extremely difficult for me. At this time, I'm tired. Outsiders might see it differently, but I've told my parents there's nothing to be happy about. We're pretending. We're in denial. And I know that they have a different perspective. My dad, he's at the end of his life, and I'm all about, well, we need to make some adjustments. We need to figure out how we can best be supportive, and how he wants to live the end of his life, because he doesn't have much long to live. That's the reality of it. And I'm willing to make compromises. I'm willing to try to figure things out. I'm working on myself, but I can't be the only one. This is a family, right? We got to bring in the family. So let's say, it's been said that the symptoms of the identified patient isn't the symptoms of that person alone. It's a reflection of the entire family. Mother needs to get involved. Father needs to make some adjustments. Sisters need to be more supportive. Things like that. So it's like, I'm at a loss for words, because I'm in deep pain. I suffer every day, and I try to make the best out of it. There are some, I don't want to get too dark, but there are some days where I tell myself, I don't know how much longer I can go on. If you look right here, those are the three things at this time. I'm tired of the invalidation. I'm tired of the blame. I get it a lot because my parents don't know any other way to communicate, right? It has to be someone's fault. You. And I'm tired of the you statements. I will not communicate with, I won't allow anyone into my life that is going to communicate to me in a harmful way. I will not be disrespected. I've tried to manage as far as I can, and I can't go any farther anymore. So if this gets exposed, then it's like, well, why aren't you communicating with your parents? Here's why. And I have plenty of examples. I can get very descriptive. I'm hurt. I was listening to a family therapist, and he talked about how in therapy, it would be important. And I think at some point I will do it, but it's not easy. But to write an impactful letter to like all of this, from my childhood to my adolescence to my adulthood, everything that has happened to me, my experience, how has it impacted me? I could tell you at this time it's impacted me greatly. It's if I could at this time, it's in me is an extreme sense of deep loneliness. And we know that at this time we're at a, especially with males, although some people want to turn a blind eye, it does happen more to males than to females. But across the board, males and females, we're at the most devastating and largest epidemic of loneliness. America has more wealth, yet we're the most loneliest country in the world. I am lonely. Loneliness kills. It reduces longevity. It's negative to your health. And that's just on loneliness. I struggle. We don't, I can be tossed around and given multiple diagnoses, but what I connect most with is trauma. And I'm openly admitting that I am a traumatized person. It's difficulty living with the trauma inside me. It's going to be lifelong. This is something that I'm going to have to learn how to manage throughout my entire lifetime. Family members can become allies, they can be supportive, they can tremendously help to a certain point. And I have to put in the work, and I have to figure something out. Down here, I drew this picture to illustrate something. And that is that when parents, you see, my parents, they were good enough parents, they supported financially, but there was a lot of issues going on. There was a lot of unpreparedness on their part. And so here you might think of like the mother or the father. Let's say the father is the sun and the mother is the clouds. And when they have children represented by these plants, each plant needs a different exposure to sun. Each plant needs adequate amount of water. So maybe this plant needs a little bit of water. This plant might need a lot of water. In my case, the school systems, the family systems, all these systems that are in play I may have slipped undetected, where I needed the most help and I didn't get that. They say, and I've heard this quote recently, they say that more times than not, the person that needs the most help is the one who least receives it. And the scapegoat rises. The scapegoat says, I'm not going to carry this on into my future relationships. If I'm destined to be single and alone, if I'm going to become homeless, then let me die in peace. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I don't die. I'm not talking like I mean, I am as well, but not just a physical death, but like a spiritual death. Trauma, you become a former shell of yourself. You're You have to understand that, and I have deep shame. You think I want to talk openly to my family and receive more blame? You know, it's like, the thing about family systems is that what makes it toxic is that it's a closed system. It doesn't allow new information to come in. If there's new information that comes in, it may radically change the dynamic. And the family is trying to establish a homeostasis. And the homeostasis is that this is what works. We're not going to change. We don't want to rock the boat too much. So if I try to do something, oh, we need therapy, I'm rocking the boat. My mother is full of excuses. Oh, your father. Oh, and it's like, I'm asking her a simple question. Would you do therapy with me? And she can't answer that. She can't give me a yes or no. We can't even get lifted off the ground to say, okay, well, let's work together. Let's establish some numbers. Let's make some phone calls. Let's get some free consultations. Let's see if we can find some bilingual therapists out there. It doesn't even get lifted off. We're all avoiding one another. We're all, and that's to my point, that like, it's the relationship. It goes both ways. It takes two to tango. And oftentimes when I'm alone, I do feel like it's my fault, right? Like, it hits me and I'm telling myself, this is all my fault. I'm a bad child. I'm no good. There's a part of me that knows that's not right. That's not healthy. I resist that. But my parents, if I try to give my mom a book, she's not really all that interested in reading. She's not involved in my care. She probably is saying, like, why me? Why don't you? And I've gotten my dad involved, and I got my dad involved sometimes. I've talked to him. What are y'all talking about? Why are y'all so secretive? Why? It's like, you can't win. And I don't get the adequate support from my parents. At this time, I was doing peer support. I was doing in-person support for a while. I had a girlfriend that I could rely on in the past. Now I don't have a girlfriend, so I don't have that resource available to me. Currently, I did, not that I'm putting in a lot of energy and effort, but I do reach out online. I did get a number online. I was going to contact, I'm going to be busy for the next few days, but I'll reach out, I'll contact that person on the phone and have a conversation and say, hey, if you're available. At my age, everyone's busy. It's kind of general knowledge that, like, as you get older, you lose friends. It's hard to establish new friends, hard to maintain. And that's the gift that I want from my entire family, is understanding. I wish that they could just understand my experience, understand my pain, understand that my preferences, my beliefs, my thoughts, my feelings, they're mine. And this is something that I think can be illuminated in therapy, is that, like, obviously there's a huge generation gap between me and my parents. At least we can we could shed some light into the cultural and the personal differences that we have. I may have different values. I know I do. One of my highest values is safetyness and privacy, right? That's why I don't, the younger generation don't really have kind of a full concept of privacy, so they just don't understand the consequences. So they the criticism is that our young generation is addicted to certain things. That they lacked. And you see it. You see women exposing their bare bodies online. You see men putting things that can harm others or themselves. And me, I'm very private. I'm just very private. I don't even like people taking pictures of me, and I think it's within my right. It's like, hey, that's a boundary of mine. Could you respect that? I don't want you to have pictures of me. I don't want you to take pictures of me. If I say, please don't pet my animal, that's my right. That's my one of the difficulties is that I have little authority. I have little power in my family. So one of the my suggestion is that my father at one time was the the captain of the ship. He was the head of the family, and now he's got to pass the torch to me. He they that doesn't happen. You know, I would like to take the torch and say, okay, twice a week we're going to have some family meetings, and we're going to make some adjustments, and we're going to make some plans, and we're going to work together as a unit. See, this is a family unit. That's where this highlight. We live together. Don't concern yourself with other family members that have their own unit. I don't mind. I mind my business. I don't concern myself with what they do. A lot of things that they do, yeah, I probably disapprove of. I probably would do things much differently, and I'm sure they feel the same way about me. But I'm trying to establish, and I have no authority to do so. It's not like I could say, like, well, Christmas is going to change. It's going to be how it was before. And how it was before was, see, when we lived at the old house, it was me and my parents and my brother when he was alive. And we'd have Christmas at the old house. My sisters were out. They'd stop by, spend a little time, drop off some presents, and then they leave. Let's go back to that. I want to have Christmas in my house and have it be where I spend with, my parents, the cat. And it's unfortunate. And here's another, I don't have any friends at this time. I mean, technically it's not really true, but it feels like it. But my parents never had any friends. Never. My mother, I think, because my dad, when he worked, at least he had acquaintances or coworkers that he could spend time with, talk with. My mother was the more isolated one. And even now, I've about, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, I took her to bingo for the first time. And then there's there's a little issues there, like, oh, she might be embarrassed to be with me. I might be embarrassed to be with her. We might think, oh, and I don't know. I've tried to suggest hobbies to my father. He just sits and looks out the window most of the time. And we all have different strategies and ideas towards financial management. I know how to manage finances. It's my father who, we just had a conversation about finances, and then he's like 2-3 days later, I would go out to a restaurant. It's like, none of us are working. We have a fixed income. And I'm preparing for my future. You can bet that I'm saving every dollar. If I have to live in a van, I will. And I'm not expecting my future to be dark. I'm wanting to get out of this cycle of dysfunction. I want a better life for me. I do consider myself a good catch. I think I'm a wonderful person to get to know. I'm just like everyone else. I have issues. We all have issues. We all make mistakes. I'm just trying to repair as much as I can. And at this time, if I have to cut this string and go on my own, if I have to walk away from the entire family, I will. But just know that there is a lot of suffering and a lot of pain that I have, that I'm enduring, and that I'm going to endure even more. So this is my genogram. The video is now reaching an hour long. I think that's a good amount of time to end the video. Just know that you're not alone. I know there are people out there that have it way worse. Give a thumbs up if you like what you saw. If you could connect, if you could relate. Leave a comment. Please leave suggestions on future topics that you want me to talk about, and I'll definitely talk about it. I'm just making videos for my therapeutic, for me, for myself, for my health. It's very therapeutic for me to make these videos. And for anyone out there, just saying, but hey, if you live in Austin, you want to hang out, talk, obviously I have plenty of time to do so. But yeah, funny thing is that I'm actually, after this, I'm actually gonna go to the store and get more food for my parents, for us. But yeah, also one thing to mention is that, yeah, my siblings, they're all Gen X, and I'm a millennial, so like I'm outside, we're a different generation. There's a lot more. This is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But this is a genogram. This is very helpful to clients. This is very helpful to therapists, family therapists. Obviously want to see this. They want to see what's going on within the psyche of the identified patient or the client. And every family member would have a genogram. Every family would see it differently. And there's family collusion, there's alliances, there's gossiping, there's triangulation, all that stuff. I didn't have enough time to mention it, but it's going on. It occurs. There's patterns of dysfunction. Families don't know how to manage and to communicate in healthy ways. There's a lot of toxicity. There's a lot of history, and it's overwhelming. Many times I feel overwhelmingly stressed. I feel it in my body. I have headaches. I have trouble sleeping. This is very difficult for me. And I'm just saying that this contributes to my mental health. My relationship with my family contributes to my mental health, the lack of support. And this is, again, just the tip of the iceberg. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot. I will not be silent, and I will not be swept under the rug. No more. And it isn't all, like, I do have some mostly it was with my brother. Like when we watch pay-per-view wrestling, it was with my brother, and I would say like those were the fondest memories I have with any family member. Even though we weren't close, we bonded over that. Like he would pay for the wrestling pay-per-views. In 1998, we bought every pay-per-view, and we saw every pay-per-view together. And I was really into wrestling at that time, and that was a very fond memory of my teenage years. And even at that time, I was struggling. I was struggling with mental health issues and stuff. But yeah, doing this, I've done this many times. I've done a genogram in my private life. It's a little bit more elaborate than what you see here. And doing this again has really opened my eyes, really given me more food for thought. And I'm just wanting, how when someone dies or is like they're getting close to dying, there's like, oh, the dying wish, and they try to like, they'll do anything and everything for that person. Why do we wait till like when they're about to die? Like, why don't we just like treat people with respect, how they want to be treated, and with compassion? And just the other day, I saw in New York City a random woman was punched in the face for no reason, for no apparent reason. And so toxicity is everywhere. You have to be on guard. You have to guard your heart, as they say in the Bible, right? You have to somehow, you have to I mean, it's life, right? I mean, that's that. I'm sure everyone has traumatic experiences and stories that they can share that were very stressful and changed the course of their lives. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Again, thanks for watching. I appreciate it.